Pirates. My name is Luffy. Chapter 41. At the edge of the execution square. Buggy and his group had just arrived at the execution square. The others pretended to look around, but Buggy and Alrita immediately noticed Luffy sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed on the execution square. It was hard not to notice him. After all, a security guard under the execution square was pointing a baton at Luffy and shouting, "Hey, kid, come down. If you go to the execution platform without permission, you will be arrested and sent to jail." At the same time, the crowd below also gathered and looked up at Luffy, who was sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed. There was no way. Luffy's ascension just now really shocked many people. Straw Hat Boy. Seeing this, Buggy the Clown at the edge of the execution platform square immediately took off his cloak and shouted excitedly, "I finally found you. Ha 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 ha, this time I will tear you into pieces. Wait for me, Straw Hat Boy." Alrita, who was standing next to him, smiled slightly, took off her slippers, and slid towards the execution platform like a skateboard. Buggy took off directly into the air, but his 2 feet were still running slowly on the ground. This scene immediately scared many people. Then someone soon recognized Buggy and shouted in horror, "Buggy the Clown! It's the Buggy the Clown pirates! Run! 2 people with special abilities. It's over, a big war between pirates is about to start." Just when these civilians were panicking, a deep and steady voice came from the other side. "White Snake. White Fist. Buggy Pirates. No one can escape. Hualala." Then everyone in the square saw 2 fists in the shape of white smoke flying from the other side of the square, and then, bang, hit Buggy the Clown, who was still laughing wildly, and the crew members around him. Bang! Chi chi chi. Buggy was hit by Smoker's punch and flew backwards for more than 10 meters before stopping. Then, like the other members of Buggy's pirate group, he was swept into the air by the white smoke. Alrita, who was halfway through the charge, ignored Buggy and slid through the crowd to a few meters in front of the execution platform. She looked up at Luffy on the execution platform and shouted, "Luffy, you ungrateful man. Do you still remember me?" Quote. Ha. The crowd who were watching the show originally thought that this devil fruit user was looking for a fight with this kid, but when they suddenly heard this beautiful woman say this, everyone was stunned, and the next thought was to get angry. Scumbag. The scene went back to 10 minutes ago. After Luffy got on the execution platform, he immediately felt a heart-pounding force rushing towards him from all around the execution square. The speed was so fast that he couldn't avoid it at all. Soon, after the power poured into his body, Luffy immediately felt as if he was on the execution square 22 years ago. He stood on the execution platform, looking at the huge crowds of people below, flags waving, gongs and drums roaring, and firecrackers blasting. Luffy even saw many celebrities. Red Hair, Buggy, Hawkeye, Gecko Mariah, Doflamingo, and Young Smoker. Then, he saw the man who opened the Great Pirate Era. That's right. The man who stood under the execution platform and asked that question. "Hey, Pirate King, where did you hide all the treasures you found? Is it the Grand Line after all? Did you get it? The legendary Great Secret Treasure, the one and only Great Secret Treasure. One Piece. Do you want my treasure? If you want, I can give you everything. Go find it, I put all my treasures there." Ah. Listening to the shout that shook the 9 heavens. Looking at the man who smiled before his death. Luffy suddenly understood something called spirit in this world. It can only be said that Roger injected a shot of cardiotonic medicine into this indifferent world ruled by the celestial dragons. Or maybe it added a little possibility. After all, this is the biggest change he can make when he is dying. In his previous life, Luffy saw many people in the 21st century looking down on everything with their eyes at that time, and arrogantly said that Roger was a black sheep. However, it is a rogue practice to evaluate what happened at that time with a perspective beyond the times. Who would have thought that the red tide could sweep the world back then? For the pioneers, we must always respect them. In the 800 years ruled by the celestial dragons, human rights have been lost, human trafficking has become open, people are not human, and animals are not animals. I don't know how many years such days have lasted, and how many years they will last. Living in such an environment, how can people not have a heart of freedom yearning for the sea? That was actually just the last struggle after being forced. Under the power of the celestial dragons, no one can truly resist. Even someone as strong as rocks would end up like that. In such a world, you cannot use the eyes of your previous life to judge the standards of this world. But, wrong is wrong. This world shouldn't be like this. This is why Luffy first set the Pirate King as a small goal. A great man once said that practice is the only criterion for testing truth. He decided to conduct a down-to-earth exploration for several years. After obtaining his own experimental report and analysis, he combined what he knew in his previous life to form a set of guidelines, principles and laws suitable for this world. This is the one thing Luffy wanted to do most after coming to this world. Putting these messy thoughts aside for the time being, Luffy found that his senses were much sharper after watching this execution. Immediately, Luffy suddenly felt his mind was empty for a while, and then he found that his perception was constantly expanding outward. Spreading out from the execution platform, he saw the buggy pirates, Alrita, and Smoker who came. He also saw Zoro who was betting his life with the demon sword. Sanji was competing in cooking skills at the beach. And Nami tried on a lot of clothes but didn't waste money on buying them. As his perception expanded again, Luffy saw Usopp who was dueling with Daddy with a child. He could even feel Usopp's sharp intuition. Almost at the same time he sensed Usopp. Usopp actually subconsciously looked in the direction of the execution platform. At this moment, a smile suddenly appeared at the corner of Luffy's mouth. He understood. This is the observation haki. The world of pirates is really full of wonders. Roger. I will remember your inheritance. Just as Luffy was feeling the inheritance of this special observation haki of listening to everything, he suddenly found that Alrita under the execution platform was pointing at him and shouting. Luffy, you ungrateful man. Do you still remember me? Cough cough cough. Luffy, who was about to say something, choked on his own saliva when he heard this, and quickly opened his eyes and shouted at her. Hey, hey, hey. What you said could easily lead to misunderstanding. Ms. Alrita. Upon hearing Luffy's words, Alrita's eyes lit up and she laughed. You really remember me. It seems that I chose you as a good choice. Thanks to you, the unfaithful man, after being beaten by you, I also ate the slippery fruit on that island. Now, I finally found you. Knock him away. The crowd below the execution platform were shocked, and then looked at Luffy and shouted in unison. Scumbag. The voice shook the 9 heavens. Luffy's face fell. How does it feel to be called a scumbag in front of thousands of people? Hey, woman, you can eat whatever you want, but you can't say whatever you want. Luffy yelled at Alrita below. Look at how you have slandered me. Cluck. Alrita covered her mouth and chuckled. Compared to the pain you left on me that day, what does this mean? What? The pain left by a hard collision. All the men looked at Luffy with angry eyes. Luffy held his forehead and sighed. What kind of vicious words are these? Tisk. It looks like you're using the slippery fruit quite well. Luffy sighed and expressed his understanding. After all, it's another ability of the slippery fruit. Alrita waved her big waves and winked at Luffy. Right. Sister's charm is invincible. What do you think? Do you want to consider becoming a slave to Sister's skirt? Luffy pinched his eyebrows and said. Instead of thinking about making me your slave, you should think about how to escape. Luffy pointed at the white smoke flying towards her. That's the natural smoke fruit. You see, Buggy has no power to resist him. Luffy had just finished speaking when Smoker's angry roar came from more than 100 meters away. Hey, Straw Hat Boy. It's you. You dare to play tricks on me. Wait for me. Upon hearing this, Alrita's face suddenly changed. Turning around, she saw a huge cloud of smoke instantly covering her surroundings. However, what was surprising was that after the smoke approached her, it slid directly to the other side. Huh. What? How is it possible? Luffy, Alrita and Smoker's voices rang out at the same time. Then Alrita showed a charming smile. It seems that the natural system is just like this. The slippery fruit is really the best. Seeing her smile, the surrounding civilians and navy were all filled with hearts. So beautiful. Colonel Smoker, I'm sorry we can't do it. Yes, how can we hurt such a beauty? Beauty is innocent. Long live Alrita. Oh. Luffy on the execution platform had an illusion when seeing this scene, wondering if he saw Boa Hancock. Smoker was so angry at the reaction of the Navy soldiers that his head hurt. It must be said that after Alrita ate the slippery fruit, except for height and temperament, she can really compare with Hancock in other aspects. Especially this ability. Could it be that the sweet fruit should be the superior fruit of the slippery fruit? Don't be too happy too soon, you ability user. Smoker pulled out the Seastone 10 hands behind him and hit Alrita with one blow. Looking at Alrita who was ready to take it, Luffy sighed helplessly, and appeared in front of her in a flash. He raised his hand with armed color and blocked Smoker's 10 hands with a bang. Huh. The powerful air waves from the collision blew away Alrita's big waves, which made her sober up a little. Hey, what are you doing? His weapon is useless against me. Alrita patted Luffy on the shoulder. Luffy looked at Alrita and said speechlessly. Don't you know that the Navy has seastone weapons? How dare you be so arrogant? If this stick hits you, you will be almost done. Why are you still standing there? Run away before the Navy surrounds you. You and Buggy are too weak. You are asking for trouble if you face Smoker now. What about you? Alrita subconsciously wanted to ask Luffy why he was not afraid of the Seastone 10 hands. At this time, Smoker was shocked and said, Haki. Luffy nodded and said, yes, armament Haki, the nemesis of ability users. He looked at Smoker and smiled. Smoker, you are too close to me. Bang. Luffy added the armament Haki to his right hand, and then quickly threw a punch, hitting Smoker's stomach. Smoker was hit by Luffy's ordinary punch, and his whole body was bent like a shrimp. His eyes bulged out instantly, and he vomited a mouthful of stomach acid. Then he flew backwards in the air and knocked down several Marines in a row. Bang bang bang. Then, Buggy and the other members of the pirate group, who were lifted up in the air by Smoker's white smoke, fell down from the air because of Luffy's punch. Seeing this, Alrita looked at Luffy with a complicated expression, then smiled and said, Luffy, I'll remember you. We'll see you again in the future. Swoosh. With that, he slid away. At the same time, the originally clear sky was suddenly covered with dark clouds, lightning and thunder. Luffy's eyes flashed, and the corners of his mouth slightly raised. Then he turned to look at Smoker and said, So, Smoker, you wanna keep fighting me? Of course. Smoker said with a grim look. Don't underestimate the Navy. White fist. Armament Haki hardening. Luffy was not afraid of him, and went straight to him with his fists. Bang. 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 All of a sudden, the white fist shadows were smashed into pieces in the collision with Luffy's fists, and turned into countless white smoke and scattered. It was like snowing. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Smoker, floating in the air, was panting constantly. While using his ability, he was also hit by armament Haki, which made him lose his strength quickly. On the contrary, the Straw Hat Kid on the opposite side was still standing there with a calm face and a calm heart, just smiling at him. Those people who were watching were dumbfounded. Is this still the invincible Colonel Smoker they knew? He was forced into this state. Phew. As expected, his power is equal to Hawkeye's. After landing, Smoker looked at Luffy with a serious expression and said, Is this world-class power? No, that's not it. Luffy corrected him seriously, I didn't even use half of the strength I used when sparring with Hawkeye. Smoker's face darkened. You don't want to give me face, right? Then there's no point in talking. Very good. Then let me see if you are really bragging. White fist. White snake. White vine. As Smoker roared, 3 fists in the shape of white smoke split into more than a dozen different fists in the air, smashing towards Luffy from different directions. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Bang bang bang. But Luffy not only did not dodge, but closed his eyes instead. Under the horrified gaze of Smoker and the others, he dodged Smoker's attack with just a few moves. What? How is this possible? Colonel Smoker's ultimate move was actually broken. Still so easy. Is this guy a monster? Impossible, absolutely impossible. Smoker roared. How can I be so far away from the world? White snake. White vine. White fist. Boom boom boom. The same moves as before were used again to attack Luffy. But Luffy still closed his eyes and walked towards Smoker step by step. There was a hole the size of a human head on the stone floor behind him. Hiss. Seeing this scene, the people around gasped. Seeing Luffy approaching, Smoker almost doubted his life and yelled and punched Luffy. This is impossible. Swoosh. Bang. Facing Smoker's punch that was like smoke, Luffy raised his hand and grabbed Smoker's fist. He used the 6 styles of play-handed combination to feel Smoker's power and nodded. Your dharmic power is also around 400. Not bad. But you seem to rely too much on the power of the devil fruit, so you are particularly weak. After saying that, Luffy grabbed Smoker's fist and threw him up. Bang bang bang. Immediately, a Hulk Hammer Loki-style smash was thrown, and Smoker was smashed into pieces. Only Luffy's arm was intact, and the observation area around the execution platform was filled with smoke from Smoker's smash. The Navy who had arrived one after another, as well as Buggy and his group who ran to the edge of the square, were all stunned. Impossible. Is he really Colonel Smoker? The invincible Colonel Smoker was beaten like this. Could that Straw Hat Boy be the captain of the most vicious pirate group in the East China Sea in recent years, Monkey D. Luffy? How terrible. Buggy, standing at the edge of the square, had a pale face and runny nose, and then swallowed subconsciously. Luffy grabbed Smoker's arm and looked at the smoke slowly condensed into a face, and another foot with the color of armed was stamped on his face. Bang! Smoker's whole body solidified again, and then fell on the ground. The brick and stone ground was immediately hit by this huge force, leaving a large dent. Smoker's nose and teeth were bleeding, and he looked at Luffy with a gloomy face and yelled. I don't believe it. White fist. White snake. White vine. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The next moment, several white smokes entangled Luffy. It's useless, it's useless, it's useless. Luffy was still walking leisurely towards Smoker. After dodging countless white smoke attacks, Luffy's figure flashed and disappeared directly on the spot. The next moment he appeared in front of Smoker. Under the latter's shocked eyes, Luffy raised his fist again and spoke calmly under Smoker's incredulous eyes. Frog in the well, let me show you how big the world is. Gear 2, Armament Hockey, Hardening. Rubber, Normal Punch. Bang. Smoker vomited stomach acid and blood again, and fell to the ground with a plop. Standing in front of Smoker, Luffy looked down at him and smiled slightly. Go back to the headquarters and have some lessons with your teacher Zephyr, Smoker. After saying that, he turned around and left slowly. The buggy pirates, the Navy, and the civilians who saw this were dumbfounded. The invincible Smoker was being hung up and hammered like a child. And he had no power to resist at all. Just when Buggy was so scared that his face turned pale, he suddenly saw Luffy, who was halfway there, turn towards them. Buggy was so scared that his face was broken. In every sense of the word. Hey, isn't this Bucky? Long time no see. What do you want to talk to me about? I heard you shouting so loudly just now. It's okay, it's okay, it's okay. Bucky waved his hands quickly and smiled flatteringly. Master Luffy, please go ahead. I'll go first. Swoosh. Buggy broke apart and fled in all directions. Alrida ran to the edge of the square and looked at Luffy with a complicated look before leaving quickly. Luffy then turned to look at Smoker, who was struggling to get up again with an ugly expression, and smiled. There is no need to fight. This will only lead to more casualties. I have no ill will towards Marines like you. Smoker, you don't want Rogue Town to be destroyed, do you? Cough, cough, cough. Smoker was so angry at Luffy's words that he coughed up blood several times. He looked up at Luffy and said in a deep voice. Straw Hat Boy, what on earth do you want to do? Luffy tilted his head and looked at him. Shouldn't I be the one asking you this? It's obvious that we only came to Rogue Town to replenish supplies. It was you who insisted on stopping me, otherwise why would there be so much trouble? You. Smoker was so angry that his face turned red. After holding it in for several seconds, he yelled. Isn't it normal for the Navy to catch thieves? Luffy's face darkened and he looked at him coldly. You are so awesome, why don't you go to heaven? You are so awesome, why don't you catch the celestial dragons? The holy land of Marihoa raises slaves and is the largest slave trader in the world. You are so awesome, why the hell don't you catch them? After all, you are just a group of watchdogs for the celestial dragons. Look how noble you are. If it weren't for the fact that you are still a good Navy, you would have died today, do you understand? The Navy is justice. Pirates are evil. You don't even understand the nature of the army, and you talk about justice, how ridiculous. Ha 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 ha. Smoker's righteous expression was mocked by Luffy, and he just stood there. Not only him, but also the surrounding navy turned to look at Smoker in disbelief. They had heard about the cruelty of the celestial dragons. But the fact that the Holy Land Marihoa was the world's largest slave trader was indeed impossible for ordinary navy officers in the first half of the Grand Line to know. Therefore, after hearing Luffy's words, they looked at Smoker with some doubt about life. That's the Holy Land. It is the seat of the highest ruling power of the world government. That kind of place has become the world's largest slave trader. They couldn't believe it. But the pirate named Straw Hat Boy spoke so convincingly that even Colonel Smoker was speechless after being refuted. If this doesn't mean anything, then they really have a problem with their brains. After reaching this result, the faith of those Navy soldiers collapsed for a while, and they were stunned just like Smoker. Luffy was too lazy to pay attention to the pale Smoker. He walked past him directly. Smoker slumped on the ground, opened his mouth, but said nothing in the end. The Marines surrounding Luffy subconsciously made way for him when he approached. Then, Zoro and his group, who had just arrived at the execution square, saw a strange scene. Hundreds of Marines surrounding Luffy made way for him, and watched Luffy, who was laughing and holding his straw hat, walk out of the way they made way for. Hey, Zoro, you are here. Luffy raised his hand and said hello. How are your supplies going? Nami nodded. I have almost finished replenishing. What are you doing, Luffy? Luffy smiled at them and said. I had a small accident here, it's not a big deal. Nami and the others looked at the chaotic execution square, the dazed navy, and the shocked onlookers. You call this a small accident? You call this a small problem? What a troublemaker. Nami held her forehead. Luffy chuckled, walked over to ruffle Nami's hair, waved his hand and said. Now that we have replenished our supplies, let's set off. We should avoid upsetting these righteous sailors. Sanji blew out a smoke ring and glanced at the dazed Marines, then glanced at Luffy and said. It's you who's in trouble again, isn't it? Let's go, we are all wanted criminals. Let's keep a low profile. Usopp whispered. I'm available anytime. Agent said with his arms folded. Luffy nodded and walked straight towards the intersection outside the execution platform square. But just as they were about to reach the intersection, Smoker's roar came from far behind them. Hey, Straw Hat Boy. So, what do you think is justice in this era? Then tell me. What is the essence of the army? After hearing Smoker's words, Luffy paused, looked sideways at Smoker in the crowd behind him, smiled and said. What is justice? Everything that benefits the people is justice. What is the essence of the army? The essence of the army is to protect the people and serve the people. This is what I think of the army. Shouldn't the army be the people's army? Quote. After that, Luffy laughed and left. But his words were like a storm that surged into the hearts of all the navy and the civilians who were watching the show. Everything that benefits the people is justice. The people's army that protects the people and serves the people. Is there really such an army in this era? Can they do it? Smoker widened his eyes in shock and looked at Luffy's back for a long time without saying a word. It seemed as if a small flame was burning in his heart. The same was true for the other navy. These words seemed to have planted a red fire in their hearts, and one day they would sweep the world like a prairie fire. Woo woo woo. The strong wind blew even stronger, and it actually blew two gaps in the dark clouds in the sky. In the two gaps in the clouds, two rays of sunlight shone through the clouds. One beam of light shone on Luffy in the crowd. The other beam of light shone on the hundreds of Navy officers under the execution platform, as well as Smoker's figure with his eyes wide open in shock. Back on the Mary, Zoro and the others were all lost in thought. There was no usual lively atmosphere. Even Nami had forgotten to set sail. Luffy walked up to her and raised his hand to rub her head, ruffling Nami's gradually growing orange hair. Hey, Nami, it's time to set sail, what are you thinking about? After a pause, Nami looked up at Luffy, with an indescribable emotion in her eyes, and smiled slightly. Yes, it's time to set sail. At this point, she looked at Zoro and the others who were also in a daze and shouted. What are you daydreaming about? It's time to set sail. Oh oh oh. Hearing Nami's words, Usopp was the first to jump up and shout, and then the others slowly started to move. Just as the sails of the Mary were lowered, Luffy's expression suddenly changed and he said in a deep voice. Nami, you go ahead. I have to meet someone. I will catch up with you in a while. Luffy, what are you talking about? Nami subconsciously wanted to ask, but was stopped by Zoro, who gestured to Nami to look at Luffy. Nami and the others looked over and saw Luffy holding his straw hat with his hand, looking solemnly at the roof of the port of Rogue Town. The Mary had not drifted far away. Although the wind was strong at this time, they could still vaguely see that there was a figure wearing a black cloak standing on the house where Luffy was looking at them. Luffy, do you know him? Sanji felt his hair stand on end when he saw this person, and he looked at Luffy in a deep voice and asked. Do you want us to go with you? Usopp raised his hand and said with trembling teeth. Me too, that guy looks so scary. No need. Luffy smiled at them and said. Don't worry. There will be no danger. Well, how should I put it? He is like my father whom I have never met. Nani. Dad. The voices of everyone on the Mary changed. Ha 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 ha. Luffy laughed loudly, then ascended to the sky directly using the moon steps. I'll go over and talk to him for a few minutes. I'll tell you after I come back. Although Nami heard Luffy say this, she still spoke with some worry. Then you have to pay attention to safety. Okay. Luffy waved his hand, stepped on the air to create several air explosions, and then rushed out again. On the Mary, Nami and the others stared at Luffy's back. It took Luffy more than 10 seconds to land next to the tall figure in the cloak, raised his hand to press the straw hat, looked at him and smiled. Should I call you the leader of the Revolutionary Army or Monkey? Drag. He had just finished speaking when the other party made a move that surprised Luffy. A few meters away, Drag bowed slightly to Luffy, and then slowly spoke. At the same time, on the Mary, Nami and the others were holding telescopes and looking nervously at the two people on the top of the house in the port of Rogue Town in the distance. Hey, what's going on? Why did Luffy's father bow to him when he met him? Could it be that because of what Luffy said before, that they had never met before, he was now regretting and apologizing? You don't have to bow to apologize, right? Oh. The two of them sat down face to face and seemed to start a conversation. Phew, I thought there would be a fight. What are you thinking? They are father and son after all. Even if they have never met, they shouldn't fight. On the roof of the other side of Rogue Town, Dorag, the father, said something that would shock outsiders. Before that, please allow me to express my respect for your previous words, even if you are my son. Because of thoughts, there is no distinction between blood relatives. Luffy didn't think it was a big deal. After all, most of the words he said before were said by great men in his previous life. Isn't it normal for him to express his respect? Seeing Dragon like this, he waved his hand casually and sat down and said. Don't mention the son anymore. We haven't met each other, right? There's no difference between us and strangers. We are at most strangers with blood relationship, right? Just call me Luffy. Drag smiled slightly, sat down casually, and didn't care about Luffy's attitude. He still said in a casual tone. I heard something about you from my father. After listening to what my father said, I especially wanted to come and see you. To be honest, I never thought that you would have such a deep opinion on the revolution. And I can feel that your thoughts are very mature. If you hadn't decided to sail for a few more years and carefully observe the situation in other countries in the world, I really wanted to bring you back to the headquarters of the Revolutionary Army. You may not understand how powerful your thoughts are. Luffy laughed in his heart when he heard this. Of course I understand. Maybe you don't understand the power of my thoughts. What does it mean that there is no one in the world who doesn't understand red? Of course, Luffy did not interrupt Dragon, but listened to him calmly and continued. Before today, I particularly liked your words, everyone is equal in this world, and, revolution is not a dinner party. And today I heard the idea that, protecting the people and serving the people, and, people's soldiers, are the essence of the army. Also, the idea that, everything that benefits the people is justice. These two ideas you mentioned have inspired me a lot. After I go back this time, I should spend some time to sort out the program of our Revolutionary Army. I even want to use these two ideas as one of the leading ideas of our Revolutionary Army, so I want to ask for your opinion. Quote. Hearing what Dragon said, Luffy laughed. I don't have any objection. If my ideas can help you help more people, then why not? Aren't you worried that my thoughts are too naive at my age? You actually want to incorporate what I said into the Revolutionary Army's program. Drago said seriously. If what you said is childish, then aren't we the Revolutionary Army just playing house? Aren't you just playing house? Luffy complained in his heart, but didn't say it out loud. In any case, his cheap father's broad-mindedness is worthy of recognition. So you came to me today just to talk about this? Luffy looked at Dragon and said calmly. Of course not, this is for you. Then, Dorag took out a Den Den Mushi chewing on a leaf from his pocket and said. This is my hotline. If you need help from our Revolutionary Army, feel free to call this hotline. I will be on duty 24 hours a day. Remember, if your life is in danger, you must call the hotline. I don't want your unformed thoughts to dissipate so early, which will be a huge loss to the people and the world. What belongs to the nation belongs to the world, I understand. Luffy took the Den Den Mushi and placed it on his knees, playing with it with his fingers while laughing. But you respect me. What belongs to the nation also belongs to the world. Dragon did not reply immediately, but savored Luffy's words thoughtfully. His eyes lit up slightly, and then he looked at Luffy and said sincerely. Your words are profound and great. Are you really not going to go back to the Revolutionary Army headquarters with me? I have no objection even if you are the leader. What a joke. Luffy rolled his eyes. Even if you think my ideas are excellent, I still think there are still many shortcomings. If you want to change the world, you must see it with your own eyes. If you can't open your eyes to see the world, how can you change it? It's just talk. Practice is the only criterion for testing truth. I have always adhered to this principle. Hiss. Speak slower, I need to take notes. After hearing Luffy's words, Dragon took a breath, quickly took out a notebook from his pocket, and wrote down what Luffy just said while muttering to himself. Seeing this scene, Luffy didn't know whether to laugh or cry. How come the seniority seems to be reversed? How about we talk about our own things in the future? I call you Dragon and you call me teacher. Thinking of this, Luffy couldn't help but chuckle and said. You trust me, remember so much. Ha ha ha. Dorag laughed and said. After all, we have the same surname and the same blood. People in our family may be destined to be extraordinary. Although my father, I, and even you have taken different paths, I think one day we will stand together again. Luffy, I am very happy to talk to you today. Well, I will not delay your journey. I hope that you can bring me a bigger surprise when I see you next time. Goodbye, I'll go first. Huh. After saying that, Dragon turned into a gust of wind and dissipated in front of Luffy. Looking at the Den Den Mushi in his hand, Luffy smiled. It seems that this cheap dad has a big vision. It's interesting. See you next time. Bang. Whoosh. Immediately, Luffy stepped on the air and created a burst of air, and flew towards the Mary on the sea in the distance. The people who were watching the situation on the ship saw that Luffy had returned so quickly, and hurriedly put down their telescopes, pretending that nothing had happened. Bang. After Luffy landed on the ship, he saw their expressions and couldn't help but laugh and cry. Don't pretend, we knew you were peeking from the rooftop. Ah! Nami exclaimed, then looked at Luffy in confusion and said. Impossible. We are hundreds of meters apart, how did you see it? Luffy laughed, jumped on the Mary and looked at them with a smile. I think everyone has gained a lot from this trip to Rogue Town. But without a doubt, my gain is definitely the greatest. Because I have comprehended a new kind of hockey. Nani. Hearing Luffy's words, everyone present exclaimed. Now, after Luffy's popular science, they are no longer the East China Sea novices who knew nothing before. At least they have a certain understanding of the three-color hockey and some of the strong men in the Grand Line and their distribution of forces. Therefore, after hearing Luffy say that he has comprehended the hockey of observation, they were shocked. Luffy jumped onto the deck, closed his eyes and smiled at Zoro and Sanji. You two come and attack me, don't worry, I don't need armament hockey. Seeing Luffy's actions, Sanji twitched his mouth and said. Hey, Luffy, are you sure you want to deal with me and Zoro with your eyes closed? It seems our captain is a bit itchy. Zoro was eager to try and pulled out two swords and said with a smile. It just so happens that I also gained a lot from my trip to Rogue Town this time, and I got 2 famous swords. Just in time to test the waters with you. No need to use armament hockey, don't cry if you get hurt. Hey, what do you want to do? Nami held her forehead helplessly. Luffy laughed and hooked his finger at the 2 of them. Come on. Zoro and Sanji looked at each other, and they kicked Luffy's neck mercilessly and slashed at Luffy's chest with 2 swords. But Luffy, with his eyes closed, just shook his body twice and easily avoided the attacks of the 2. Seeing this scene, Akin and Usopp standing on the bow deck opened their mouths in surprise. However, this was just the beginning. As Zoro and Sanji attacked frantically and quickly, Luffy dodged their attacks even faster. After attacking for several minutes, Sanji and Zoro still didn't touch Luffy. Hey, how is this possible? Luffy, have you awakened some devil fruit ability again? Mr. Luffy seems to be able to predict your 2 attacks. Yes, this should be the observation haki that Luffy mentioned before, right? Huh. Sanji and Zoro stopped attacking and took a breath before looking at Luffy. Luffy, what on earth is this? Explain it to us. Luffy then slowly opened his eyes, looked at them and smiled. Nami is right. This is observation haki. I learned it when I was on the execution platform. I have told you about the effect of observation haki before, right? I just want you to feel the power of observation haki. After hearing Luffy's words, Zoro and Sanji's eyes lit up. It must be said that this observation haki is really easy to use. If you learn it, doesn't it mean that you can easily avoid the enemy's attack in the future? Seeing their expressions, Luffy smiled slightly and said something that shocked everyone. In fact, there are already people on our ship who have the signs of awakening their observation and hearing. As long as they undergo some training, they will definitely be able to awaken. Are there other people on our ship who have awakened their observation haki besides you? Zoro looked at Luffy in surprise. Luffy shook his head. It's not that someone has awakened, but that someone has the opportunity to awaken. Hearing Luffy's words, Usopp jumped up and down excitedly and shouted. Who is who? Who is who? Sanji, Kin and Nami all looked at Luffy with hope. After all, if observation haki can be awakened, it will definitely be another powerful weapon. But no one expected that Luffy raised his finger and pointed at Usopp and said with a smile. That's right, it's you, Usopp. Nani. Everyone else opened their mouths and eyes wide, looking at Usopp in disbelief. Usopp also pointed at himself in disbelief and said. What? Is it me? Is it me? Is it really me? Luffy, are you sure you are right? Luffy answered irrelevantly. Think about how you felt when you dueled with Daddy with a child, Usopp. How do you know I had a duel with Daddy who was raising a child? Wait. The feeling you're talking about. Usopp was looking down and recalling the feeling he had at that time. Because the distance was not too long, he could clearly feel the strange feeling at that time. You know, with his previous level, it was impossible to hit a target that far away with a slingshot. And it went through the heart. It was impossible to hit it even with a gun at that distance. How did he hit it at that time? Just as Usopp was thinking about this, he heard Luffy's voice in his ears. Rubber, normal punch. Swoosh. Under the shocked gaze of others, Luffy suddenly punched Usopp. Hey, Luffy. Ouch, what are you doing? Zoro and Nami just said, but the next scene shocked them even more. Swish. Usopp, who was looking down, turned his head subconsciously and easily avoided Luffy's attack. Continuous ordinary punches. Swish, swish, swish. Swish, swish, swish. However, the shock was far from over. As Luffy threw several punches again, Usopp cleverly dodged Luffy's punches with various postures. I'm Chow. Usopp. How did you do it? You. Sanji and Zoro were all stunned, looking at Usopp with disbelief in their eyes. Me. Usopp himself couldn't believe it, and then he immediately raised his fists and pointed his thumbs at himself and laughed. Ha ha ha, you didn't expect that. I'm the first player among you to master haki. Don't envy me, okay? This is strength. Luffy, hit me again. Let me show them what observation haki is. Okay, here it comes. Rubber, ordinary punch. Bang. Nani. Usopp wanted to dodge Luffy's attack just like he did before, but the feeling was suddenly cut off, and he was hit by Luffy's ordinary punch, which almost made him vomit bile. Cough cough cough. Luffy, you're too cruel. You want to kill me, right? I'm dying. Cough cough cough. Seeing Usopp lying on the ground, bent over like a shrimp and screaming, everyone couldn't help but laugh or cry. Luffy was also speechless. I didn't expect your observation haki to suddenly fail. But it's normal. After all, you have just come into contact with this kind of power, and you still need more training in the future. Shua. After hearing Luffy's words, everyone else's eyes immediately focused on him. How do you train your observation haki? Almost everyone asked the same question at the same time. Luffy pointed at Usopp, who was still rolling on the ground holding his stomach and screaming, and said with a smile. Just learn to take a beating like Usopp. And cover your eyes and dodge the attacks. Over time, it will become a natural reaction, and you will naturally sense danger and dodge subconsciously. This is how you practice observation haki. But you don't need it for now, and there are not many people on the ship who can practice observation haki. Let's go to the next station, and find a place on the Grand Line to rest for a while, and then practice. Hearing this, Zoro subconsciously said. Isn't this just practicing getting hit? The others also reacted, and they shuddered subconsciously when they saw Usopp in pain. You know, Usopp couldn't always avoid Luffy's attacks when he just woke up. If they couldn't avoid Luffy's ordinary punches, wouldn't they die on the spot? Thinking of this, they all shuddered. Nami was the first to raise her hand and said. I don't want to practice this observation haki. I'd better just focus on figuring out how to shave. I'm just a weak woman with a bounty of only 60,000. Usopp, who was lying on the ground wailing in pain, raised his hands tremblingly. Return. And me. Luffy bent down and looked at Usopp, smiling slightly. You can't do it, you have to learn, Usopp. I will try to let you master the observation haki before entering the Grand Line. Ah! Usopp let out a shrill scream and hugged Zoro's legs and wailed. I won't learn, I won't learn. It's too late. Everyone looked at Usopp with lifeless eyes with sympathy. After a few days of sailing, Usopp had been beaten a lot. His body was covered with bruises. This was because Luffy didn't use any strength, otherwise Usopp might have died now. What surprised Luffy the most was that after Usopp's beatings over the past 2 days, his Taoism power actually increased by dozens of points. Usopp has at least 300 Dharmakaya in his life. This is not low. But it is understandable if you think about it, after all, he is a member of the protagonist group. In addition, every time Luffy pulls Usopp out, he lets him fall into the sea, and then lets him swim back by himself. It is normal for his Dharmakaya to improve after repeated training. Of course, Usopp can recover so quickly because of Sanji's cooking skills. The meat of sea beasts and sea kings in the world of One Piece are extremely nutritious and valuable. In addition, Luffy is different from the poor adventurer in his previous life. He is very rich. A lot of meat supplements and dishes were bought in Rogue Town. In addition, after Sanji's processing and cooking, although it has not reached the perverted food supplement of the shemale recipe, it is not too bad. This is why Usopp can recover so quickly. With such good treatment and such training, if he doesn't make faster progress, he can't be considered a protagonist group. At least in the past 1 or 2 days, Usopp has been beaten less and less, and he can avoid Luffy's attacks more and more. At first, Zoro and Sanji were gloating over the misfortune, but now they were a little anxious when they saw Usopp dodging Luffy's attacks with ease. No, Usopp was improving so fast, they didn't want to be left behind by this guy. Otherwise, they couldn't stand being commanded by this guy as the vice captain every day. Bang! Ah! Just as they were thinking about this, Usopp screamed and was blown away dozens of meters again, falling into the sea in the distance. At the same time, the speed of the Mary also slowed down. After all, it had to wait for Usopp to swim back. But at this moment, Usopp's shout suddenly came from a distance. Hey, everyone! There's a small boat over here. There's a child on it. After hearing what Usopp said, Nami immediately asked Zoro and Kin to retract the sails. Luffy also swung his arm out to pull the boat back to the Mary. Usopp, who was on the sea in the distance, pointed at himself in shock and said. What about me? I haven't even boarded the boat yet. Swim back. Luffy's shout came from the Mary. Luffy, you devil. Usopp roared in anger, and then he could only speed up and swim back to the Mary. Everyone on the Mary also gathered around, looking at the little girl lying on the boat with a puzzled look on their faces. Could it be that this little girl was in a shipwreck? Possible. She is still alive, she is really lucky. Luffy did not discuss with them. He looked at the little girl and felt that she looked familiar. After thinking for a while, Luffy pulled his memory to Rogue Town and checked it out. He knew who this little girl was. Night. After Luffy and his friends finished their dinner, they all sat on the deck and listened to Luffy's popular science knowledge about hockey and some precautions on the Grand Line. Of course, Luffy knew all this from the anime in his previous life. But basically, he only needed to give a general idea. At this moment, Luffy suddenly stopped talking and turned to look at the cabin on the second floor. Everyone turned their heads subconsciously, but they found nothing. Click. But in the next second, the hatch was opened by a little girl, who was sticking her head out and looking at Luffy and the others quietly. After seeing the little girl wake up, Nami couldn't help but smile. You're awake. How do you feel? Sanji smiled and said. There is dinner prepared for you in the kitchen. I will go and heat it up for you now. Usopp looked at her in surprise and pointed to the small wooden boat on the side. Why are you lying in a small wooden boat alone? Did you encounter a shipwreck? The little girl obviously didn't expect that these strangers cared about her so much, which made her feel warm in her heart. But when she raised her eyes and saw the Straw Hat pirate flag, her mouth suddenly opened wide. Pirates. Bang. After a scream, the little girl immediately closed the hatch. Seeing this, Zoro couldn't help but burst into laughter and looked at Ajin and said. Ah Jin, is it because you look too fierce that you scared the little girl? Ah Jin immediately doubted his life when he heard this. Is it a sin to be ugly? Bang. Usopp slapped Zoro on the head. How dare you say that? Then he immediately turned around and comforted Ajin. Ah Jin is fine, he is ugly but lives long, he is handsome but ages fast. Akin looked at Usopp expressionlessly. Listen to me, thank you. Usopp put his arm around Ajin's shoulders and laughed triumphantly. You are being so polite to me, ha ha ha. Ah Jin. Do you really think I'm thanking you? Sanji ignored the two people's nonsense. He immediately jumped up to the second floor kitchen and went to comfort the little girl. After a while, the little girl let down her guard and completely relaxed after eating the food made by Sanji. Everyone knew her name, Abyss. Luffy's eyes lit up when he heard it. Sure enough, this was the little girl in the Millennium Dragon chapter. In his previous life, Luffy found that there were actually many mysterious places in the Millennium Dragon chapter that had not been fully explained. For example, the mysterious barrier that protected the island like a mirror, and the words that Long Yi said that returning to the Dragon Cave could be reborn. Luffy thought that it was very likely that Long Yi could really be reborn if he returned to the Dragon Cave. The Dragon Cave was not in the hatching place of the Millennium Dragon, but on the island wrapped in the mysterious barrier. There was also the fact that the dragon bones of the Millennium Dragon could be made into elixirs of immortality. These three things are very worth exploring. If there is really such a plot, then this time he will dig it out carefully. With Nami, a gentle elder sister, around, Abyss didn't reveal the location of the Millennium Dragon, but told them the island where she was. Gunkanjima. It took Luffy and his friends half a day to find the island. The pirates are coming. Originally, when they saw Luffy's pirate ship, the villagers on Gunkanjima were very nervous, but they became confused again after seeing Avis. After Avis got off the ship, she briefly explained the matter, saying that she was captured by human traffickers, and then she escaped. After listening to her, Luffy just smiled and didn't expose her. In a sense, the Navy is indeed one of the human traffickers. After all, aren't these Navy people escorting the auction houses of those human traffickers in the Sabayati archipelago? Late at night, after eating and drinking, Luffy called Nami and the others together, and followed Avis to the back mountain. Is it necessary to heal Luffy? Nami looked at Luffy puzzled. It's normal for everyone to have some secrets, right? Why? Zoro yawned. You stayed up late at night and called us to follow a little girl. Luffy, your hobby is getting more and more perverted. Sanji, Usopp and Kin nodded in agreement. Luffy rolled his eyes and said speechlessly. I just want to teach you ignorant guys a lesson. You will know it soon. Luffy and his friends followed Avis into the cave. Although Avis had eaten the parahuman whispering fruit, she was still a child. Besides, the fruit was useless, so she didn't notice Luffy and his friends hiding. In addition, Luffy used his observation haki to track them, so she couldn't find them. Lord Long, I brought you some food. Lord Long. As Luffy and the others approached, they heard Abyss mumbling while feeding the Millennium Dragon and communicating with it in a low voice. Abyss was muttering and communicating with the Millennium Dragon. The Millennium Dragon, which was originally lying on the ground like an elderly person with Alzheimer's disease, suddenly squatted up, and slightly spread its wings. Its huge body protected Abyss under it. Lord Long, what's wrong with you? Abyss looked up at the Millennium Dragon in confusion. Then Luffy's helpless voice came in. Abyss, you have been hiding this 1,000-year-old dragon here. Even if it is not dead yet, it will soon be starved to death by you. Abyss was startled at first when he heard the voice, but then he relaxed a lot when he saw Luffy and the others. He still asked vigilantly. Ah, it's Luffy, how did you know this place? Luffy walked straight to the Millennium Dragon, raised his hand and pressed it on its head while saying. I found it when I got to the island. Abyss, your idea is good to hide it here. But you don't have the ability to feed it. Look at how hungry this 1,000-year-old dragon is. Even if it is old, it shouldn't look like this, right? Ah! Abyss exclaimed in surprise. But I bring food to Lord Long every day. Luffy pressed the Millennium Dragon's head and looked into his eyes. After a while, he couldn't help but smile. If you want to go back to the dragon's nest, we can take you back. Anyway, since we are here, we will just send you off. It is up to you to decide. After feeling that Luffy and the others had no ill intentions, Long Yi crouched down again, nudging Luffy's hand with his head and making a hissing sound. Ha ha ha. Luffy burst into laughter and looked at Abyss and said. Your Lord Dragon said that it was really hungry. Abyss's face turned red, but then she looked at Luffy in shock. Luffy, you can actually understand what Lord Long said. Ah. Luffy smiled and nodded. I have a special kind of observation haki, so I can probably understand what Mr. Long meant. Usopp was immediately excited, pointing at himself and said. Luffy, is my observation haki okay? No way. Luffy decisively interrupted Usopp's fantasy. Only my observation haki, which is called listening to everything, can hear the voices of animals, not to mention your half-baked observation haki. You should practice more. Tisk. Usopp curled his lips. Hiss. Sanji took a puff of his cigarette, rolled up his sleeves and smiled. If you want to eat, leave it to me. 2 hours later, after eating and drinking, Long Yi suddenly became much more energetic. Seeing Long Yi's expression, Abyss felt even more embarrassed and hugged Long Yi's legs with some self-blame. Long Yi lowered his head and looked at her with loving eyes, and at the same time gently stroked Abyss's head with his huge wings. Luffy smiled slightly and said. Abyss, you don't have to blame yourself. Dragon Lord said that if it weren't for you, it would have died. It is because of you that Dragon Lord has the opportunity to cheer up again. So, what is your decision now, Dragon Lord? If we go back to the dragon's nest, you have to show us the way. Do you remember the way? Hiss. On the open space behind the mountain, Lord Long hissed and waved his wings, pointing in a direction. Is that so? Luffy pondered for a moment and looked at Zoro and said. Zoro, chop some wood, and we'll make a simple cart to put the Dragon Lord on. Then we can tie the cart to the Mary with ropes when we sail. Okay. Zoro nodded immediately and turned around to go choose wood with Usopp. Nami glanced at the sky and said. Luffy, do we need to be so anxious? It's still dark now. Luffy shrugged and said. Didn't you hear what Abyss said? A Navy admiral has set his sights on Lord Long. If you leave during the day, the villagers will know and they will be implicated. Hearing this, Nami and the others nodded thoughtfully. They really hadn't considered this. Abyss looked up at Luffy and grinned. Thank you, Luffy. Luffy touched Abyss's head. It doesn't matter, I'm just interested. More than 2 hours later. It was dark. Under the shocked gaze of Nami and the others, Luffy directly turned on the second gear, lifted up the Dragon Master and flew down the mountain. Although Nami and the others knew that Luffy was very strong, they didn't expect that he could fly with the moon step while carrying such a huge body of the Dragon Master. It really shocked them. Doesn't that mean that Luffy can even fly with the Mary? Abyss was already stunned. Zoro, Sanji, Usopp and Akin carried the huge simple cart towards the Mary. After placing the Dragon Master, they set sail overnight and drove in the direction pointed by the Dragon Master. After all, the Dragon Master has a bit of Alzheimer's disease. If he doesn't hurry up and forgets the way again, it will be a disaster. After half a day of sailing, Luffy and the others finally arrived in front of the mysterious barrier. But at this moment, Nami, who was observing the surroundings with a monocular telescope, exclaimed, "Luffy, a Navy ship is catching up with us." Hearing about the Navy, Abi's body trembled a few times, and immediately turned around in a panic. Oh no, the Navy must want to catch Long Yi. No, I have to go accompany Long Yi. Don't worry, Abis. Luffy held his straw hat with one hand and looked at the warship in the distance, and held Abis's little head with the other hand and smiled slightly. With me here, no one can catch Lord Long. Abis, you don't want Lord Long to be caught by the Navy, right? Just stay on the ship. Abis, who was originally very anxious, felt much more at ease after hearing Luffy's words. She looked up at Luffy, her big eyes full of admiration, and then nodded heavily. Yeah, I'll listen to Luffy. Luffy smiled when he heard that, then turned to look at Nami and said, Nami, don't worry about the Navy, we can just go in directly. Go in? Nami asked in confusion. The others looked at Luffy in confusion. Luffy pointed to the front and said, drive forward, and you will know what I mean. Nami and the others drove the ship towards the direction Luffy pointed with doubt, and soon everyone's face changed. Because the bow of the Mary seemed to disappear in front of them. Ah! Mary! Usopp exclaimed in surprise. The others also changed their expressions. Luffy said speechlessly. It's just a mirror like a barrier. Lord Long said don't worry. Although Luffy said so, as the hull of the Mary gradually disappeared in front of them, their faces gradually became weird. They never thought that this so-called mirror would be like this. Nami and the others on the Mary were all scared, not to mention the Navy following behind. Hey! What's going on? Isn't it weird? Lieutenant Colonel, are we still going to chase them? Eric, this is a special situation. The waters ahead are unknown. I can't let so many soldiers accompany you in on the adventure. In that case, give me a boat and I will follow. Ah, you want to go too? On the Navy ship, the soldiers were obviously frightened when they saw the Mary disappearing in the air. Bang! In an instant, a small boat was lowered from the ship, and the man with purple curly hair and a pair of glasses jumped down easily. He seemed to not care about the strange scene in front of him at all. Eric, you wanted to go there yourself. The lieutenant colonel standing on the warship said to Eric below. Eric ignored him and just put his hands together to make a sword-like gesture and waved it backwards. Whoosh whoosh. Several wind blades suddenly appeared out of nowhere and sent a sudden thrust to the rear, pushing Eric's boat forward like a motorboat. Seeing this scene, the lieutenant colonel on the warship wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and sighed. Devil fruit users are so scary. The Navy officers following him nodded and said in a low voice. Lieutenant Colonel, should we report to the Admiral? The lieutenant colonel curled his lips. We can't act rashly before Eric comes out. Let's just wait for him here. Yes. After hearing the lieutenant colonel's words, the Navy soldier immediately saluted and walked away. On the other side, in the mirror barrier. After the Mary came in, Nami and the others exclaimed again. Because the sea area inside this mirror barrier is completely different from the sunny day outside, the sky is covered with dark clouds and the sea is rough. Nami just sniffed the air and shouted in a deep voice. Zoro, hold on to the mainsail, and Kin, control the jib. Sanji and Usopp, control the rudder. A storm is coming, and we need to be prepared. Luffy, take Abyss and watch over Lord Dragon, and don't let it slip into the sea. Under Nami's orderly arrangement, everyone on the Mary shouted at the same time. Got it. Nami nodded in satisfaction, and then looked at the sky with a serious expression while writing in her sailing diary. These are all sailing experiences that need to be recorded at all times. Boom boom. Whoosh whoosh. Sure enough, soon after Nami finished speaking, there were thunders in the sky, and the storm immediately roared down. Fortunately, Nami warned them in advance, otherwise they would be very passive. Only then did they understand how powerful Nami, the navigator, was. After Nami's micro-manipulation, it took the Mary about half an hour to get rid of the storm. Then, the Mary suddenly entered a sunny day and a blue sea environment like a mirror. The scene that suddenly appeared in front of them caught everyone on the Mary by surprise. After all, the sky was dark and cloudy and the sea was rolling in the previous minute, and it became this peaceful scene in the next minute. Especially the sky above the head, it is so beautiful that it makes people sigh. Above the sky behind Luffy Mary, there are still dark clouds. And above the sky in front of Mary, there is a huge circular hole, with thin white clouds floating above the hole, plus the blue sky and gentle sunshine. The calm sea and the ancient island in the distance formed a beautiful and shocking scene under extreme contrast. Seeing this scene, everyone on the Mary was amazed. What a beauty! I didn't expect to see such a wonderful sight after the storm. This kind of scene seems to exist specifically. So, in that case, the island ahead is where the dragon's nest is. This is not surprising, right? After all, isn't it normal for a 1,000-year-old dragon's nest to be a little special? Everyone nodded in agreement. Soon, the Mary floated to the port of the island. This port vaguely shows traces of past human activities, and coupled with the stone houses made of bricks and stones on the island, it even gives people a feeling that people are still living there. But after Luffy landed on the island, he used his observation haki to scan it. Unfortunately, there were no living people on it except for some birds and small animals. Luffy, how is it? Nami looked at Luffy. She knew that Luffy was just observing the situation on the island with his observation haki. Hearing Nami's words, Luffy shook his head and said, "There are no living people. This island must have been abandoned for a long time. I just don't know why Lord Long came to this place. I don't seem to find any traces of a dragon's nest here." Voila! After pulling Lord Long ashore, the handcart finally came in handy. Luffy and Zoro pulled Lord Long around the stone city like two old oxen, while Luffy talked to Lord Long. "Lord Long, is this really the dragon's nest you mentioned? I scanned it before, and it seems there is nothing else except some ruins on the top of the mountain." Abyss was sitting on Lord Long's back and talking to him. After a while of being in a daze, Long Yi seemed to suddenly remember something, raised his head and neighed. Hearing this sound, Luffy turned his head to look at Long Yi in surprise and said, "Are you sure? Well, I'll try it later. This island has not been inhabited for so many years, and I don't know if the mechanism can still be used." After that, Luffy explained to everyone what Lord Long had just said to him. What he meant was that the dragon's nest was in the ruins on the top of the mountain. There is a mechanism in the ruins that can open the top of the mountain, and then let the injured or aging Millennium Dragon come to this place, and use the dragon pool in the dragon's nest to restore their own strength. And thus become younger. This is one of the main reasons why the Millennium Dragon can have a long lifespan. When Nami and the others heard this, their eyes suddenly lit up. They didn't expect that they could hear such a secret, and they all felt that this adventure was not in vain. After Luffy and the others struggled to pull Lord Long to the top of the mountain, Eric finally slid out of the storm sea with difficulty. If he hadn't seen the Mary in the port in the distance, he would have doubted whether he was chasing in the wrong direction. Very good. After seeing the Mary, Eric's smile became more and more intense, and then he couldn't help laughing out loud. There is no better place to kill and bury the dead than this. After I kill you and take the keel, I can just use your ship to escape. As for the order of Admiral Nelson, that fat pig in the Navy, let him die. Fate is in my hands, fate is in my hands. Ha 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 ha. Just like an old ox pulling a cart, Zoro saw Luffy suddenly stop. He couldn't help but glared at him and said, "Hey Luffy, what's wrong with you? Are you trying to be lazy? Am I that kind of person?" Luffy protested. "You're not. Then why are you laughing? I found something interesting. What's up? You are young but have many problems, so just drive the cart with peace of mind." Soon Luffy and his friends arrived at the intersection of the ruins on the top of the mountain. After a while of searching, Luffy reached into a round hole on the right side of the huge stone gate that was 20 to 30 meters high. Zoro was also ready on the other side. Soon the two found a ring of iron rope in the hole, and Luffy and Zoro pulled the ring out at the same time. As the iron chain was pulled out, there was a sound of mechanism, and the huge stone door in front of them, which was 20 to 30 meters high, slowly began to sink down with a rumble. Soon, Luffy and his friends saw that there was nothing but an ordinary brick and stone gate in front of them. There were two huge stone doors on the top of the hall, which were slowly opening to both sides. The sun shone down through the round top entrance. The whole hall was a square hall with a length and width of about 100 to 200 meters. On the walls of the hall, there were various patterns. They were the intersections between humans and Millennium Dragons. The rock walls of the hall were also covered with various tree roots, which looked very old. Hiss. The next moment, with the roar of the Dragon Lord who was pulled in, the huge stone door they had entered through slowly closed again. Hey! Why is the door closed? Usopp panicked. Luffy smiled and said. Don't worry, this is the mechanism here, you can open it when you want to go out later. Hearing this, Usopp and the others breathed a sigh of relief. After the dragon neighed, the bricks and stones on the ground in front of them began to move slowly. Soon, a black hole with a length and width of nearly 100 meters appeared. In front of Luffy and the others, a series of stairs extended to the bottom of the black hole. At this time, after sniffing, the dragon seemed to smell something, which made the whole dragon more energetic. Lord Long suddenly stretched out his wings and walked slowly down towards the black hole below. Luffy and the others followed him down slowly. After walking for a few minutes, the bricks and stones above their heads merged together again with a click. It was as if nothing had happened. Luffy originally thought that his vision would become darker after the light above his head was blocked, but he didn't expect that the sunlight could still penetrate those bricks and stones, and shine in, making the area below the black hole as bright as day. Hiss. What material are these bricks and stones made of? Now it seems that this is not an ordinary stone, right? Ordinary stones can't have this kind of light transmitting and light focusing effect. Luffy and the others started to discuss. And Abyss, who was sitting on Long Yi in front, suddenly exclaimed. Wow! What a beautiful dragon pond. Is this the place that Lord Long said could restore one's strength? It's so beautiful. After hearing what Abyss said, Luffy and the others stopped observing the strange, translucent bricks and stones above their heads and quickly headed downwards. When they reached the bottom of the stairs, Luffy and the others saw a blue light illuminating them. On the rock walls surrounding the cave at the bottom, there were all kinds of white crystals, which absorbed the light refracted from above, and then blue light appeared under the illumination of the blue lake in the center of the cave. Then, these blue lights made the entire cave look like a blue ocean. Whoosh! Whoosh! Hiss! When seeing the lake, Long Yi looked much more excited. He spread his wings and flew low towards the blue lake in the middle, hissing at the same time. What? Hearing the roar of Lord Long, Luffy was stunned for a moment, and then he was ecstatic. Lord Long, are you telling the truth? Can we also take a dip in this dragon pool? Are there any benefits? Hiss. In response, Dragon Lord roared again. Nami and the others were stunned for a moment. They didn't expect Luffy to suddenly say such a thing. Very good. Luffy waved his fist fiercely and smiled at Nami and the others. Lord Long just told me that after humans soak in this dragon pool, their lifespan can be extended by 1 or 200 years or even longer. And their physical constitution will also change greatly. These are all things in Lord Long's memory. Nani. Zoro and the others also exclaimed, and then there was a burst of ecstasy. They never thought that they would have such benefits after just taking the risk to broaden their horizons. When Luffy and the others walked to the edge of the lake, the whole body of the Dragon Lord except for his head had been submerged in the center of the dragon pond. Seeing this, Luffy glanced at the others, thought for a while, and then said. So, Zoro, hold me. I'll go down first and see if there's really no danger to us. Then you guys can come down. After hearing Luffy's words, the joyful expressions on the faces of the others froze, and then they understood what Luffy meant. Luffy wanted to help them test the waters first. Really test the waters. Zoro nodded in approval of Luffy's words. Okay, if there's anything wrong, call me. Luffy nodded. As the captain, he naturally had to lead by example. Although Long Yi said so, he couldn't just jump down with his companions without trying anything, right? It's not that he doubted Long Yi had any bad intentions towards them. The main thing is this 1,000-year-old dragon is an Alzheimer's dragon. What if it remembers something wrong? Then they will be in trouble. Nami and the others also reacted, and then they restrained their happy expressions and looked at Luffy nervously. Luffy directly threw one of his hands to Zoro, and then jumped directly into the lake. Huh. Luffy was stunned when he just jumped into the lake. He could actually move. This doesn't look like seawater. Although I'm not feeling well, I can still move. You can actually move. How is this possible? Zoro and the others were also very shocked. In the past, Luffy would collapse even if he took a freshwater bath. Although he could still move, it was still very strenuous. Luffy's feet are very flexible now. Luffy felt it a little bit, and his feet were already slapping the water excitedly, and he felt a kind of extreme kidney deficiency. But this feeling was soon dispersed by a surge of energy into the body. The neutralization of these two energies caused Luffy to be able to swim in the water. If it was seawater, it would definitely not work, but if it was here, Luffy felt that his body seemed to have endless strength. He could even feel his Tao power growing upwards little by little. It's incredible. Good man, this wouldn't be the legendary opportunity in fantasy novels, right? The dragon pool is. But I have to say that it feels really good to soak in it, especially the feeling that the strength is constantly increasing and he can clearly perceive it. How to say it? Hey, it's very comfortable. After soaking for a while, Luffy's eyes became brighter and brighter, and he shouted to them. It really works. I feel that the power of my body is growing little by little. This may be a great opportunity for us to improve our strength. Plop, plop, plop. Hearing Luffy's words, Zoro shook off Luffy's hand, dropped his 3 swords, and jumped directly into the lake. Sanji, Kin, and Usopp followed closely behind. Nami grabbed Luffy's arm and quietly leaned against the lake shore with him. She was mainly worried that if Luffy couldn't move again in a while, she could take care of him. Luffy naturally knew what Nami was thinking, and just smiled slightly, put his arm around her waist, and the two of them leaned on the rocks on the shore and watched Zoro and his group playing in the water with Abyss and the others. But at this moment, Usopp, who had dived into the water, suddenly popped up, holding a green fruit-shaped fruit with various strange patterns, and then looked at Luffy and shouted excitedly. Road. Luffy, look. I found this at the bottom of the lake. Crash. After seeing what Usopp was holding, Luffy stood up directly by the rocks on the shore, staring at the thing in his hand with wide eyes and said in shock. Hey, hey, hey. Usopp, you are really lucky. What you have in your hand must be a devil fruit. What? Hearing Luffy's words, Zoro and the others who were still enjoying the water were startled and turned to look at Usopp. Usopp also said excitedly. Right. When I saw it just now, I thought it looked like the devil fruit you mentioned before, Luffy. So I wanted to take it up and have a look. It is connected to a vine, growing from the bottom of the lake, floating in the water. Quote. Usopp swam over to Luffy and handed him the devil fruit. After a closer look, Luffy found that the shape of this devil fruit was very special. It looked like a cucumber, with various patterns on the green skin, but on both sides of the fruit there were wings. Seeing this, Luffy used his observation haki to feel it again, and his eyes narrowed slightly. Yes, my observation haki can sense the energy fluctuations in this devil fruit. But judging from the shape, it may be an animal fruit. Wait, let me think about it. As he spoke, Luffy closed his eyes and began to observe his memory. However, after going through his memory, including the original plot and the theater version he knew, plus the 170 original devil fruits from the TV series, he did not find an illustration of the same devil fruit. But think about it, how could anyone find a devil fruit in this dragon's nest that only appears once every 1,000 years? Or, is it that this fruit grew back here after a person died? No matter which possibility it is, this is definitely a devil fruit he has never seen before. Such a devil fruit. Thinking of this, Luffy suddenly had an idea in his mind, and then he suddenly opened his eyes and looked at Long Yi in the distance, then looked down at the devil fruit in his hand and muttered. No way. But it's not impossible. After all, this is the dragon pond in the dragon's nest. Zoro, Sanji, and Jin also swam over and looked at the devil fruit in Luffy's hand curiously. Is this what a devil fruit is supposed to look like? The shape of each devil fruit is different, so I can't tell anything from it. Quote. It's really strange, could it be that the same ability as Mr. Luffy comes from this? They are not the same abilities. For parahuman devil fruits, the abilities are rarely the same. A devil fruit that even Luffy has never seen before. A few people started discussing, and Luffy handed the devil fruit to Usopp, then looked at Zoro and the others and smiled. I haven't mentioned this to you before. I'll mention it now. Regarding the devil fruit, my suggestion is that whoever finds it will own it. After all, it is a secret treasure of the sea, and it is also an opportunity for everyone to become stronger. Unless it is a devil fruit obtained by our team, I will distribute it and let you choose the most suitable person to use it. If none of them are suitable, we will save this devil fruit for future use. What do you think? After hearing Luffy's words, the few of them looked at each other and said to Zoro. I have no opinion. I have no objection either. Sanji also nodded in agreement. Nami, Kin, and Usopp all nodded in agreement. Then, everyone's eyes fell on Usopp. Seeing everyone's eyes, Usopp was startled and said nervously. Hey, why are you looking at me? Sanji heard this and said with a sly smile. Usopp, do you want to try it? This is a devil fruit. Hey, Usopp, come eat and show us. Zoro was also very curious. Agent stared at Usopp. Ah, should I eat it? Usopp looked at the devil fruit in his hand with some entanglement. But if I eat it, I won't be able to swim, right? After thinking for a while, he said. Luffy, what do you think? I'll listen to you. Luffy thought for a moment and said. My observation Haki gives me the feeling that this fruit is a bit unusual. But it looks like an animal-type fruit. However, one thing is certain, as long as you eat the devil fruit, you will definitely become stronger. After all, we now have a bounty order, and we will encounter stronger enemies after entering the Grand Line. This is good news for you. Quote. Usopp looked at the devil fruit in his hand and thought for a while before saying in a deep voice. I eat it. As soon as he finished speaking, he looked at Zoro, Sanji and Akin nervously and said. Hey, I'm going to rely on you to save me from now on. If I fall into the sea, I'll be dead. Zoro, Sanji and Kin rolled their eyes when they heard this. Usopp was about to eat after he finished speaking, but suddenly there was a hissing sound in the middle of the lake. Luffy was stunned for a moment when he heard this, then he looked at Long Yi in astonishment and said. Lord Long, are you sure what you said is true? Are you suffering from Alzheimer's disease again? Pa. Abyss, who had just swam over, immediately jumped up and stabbed Luffy in the head. Luffy, please be polite when talking to Lord Long. Luffy casually lifted Abyss up in the air and fell into deep thought as he watched Abyss struggling vigorously. Nami seemed to sense something was wrong and looked at Luffy and said. What happened to Luffy? Plop. Luffy loosened his grip and Abyss fell into the water. After struggling for a while, she floated up again. How could she look like a devil fruit user in the water? She was even more relaxed than Luffy. Seeing Luffy staring at her, Abyss immediately became nervous. Hey, Luffy, you are not going to bully a child. At this time, Sanji also reacted immediately and said. Abyss, if I remember correctly, you also ate a devil fruit, right? The parahuman whisper fruit. Yes, I told you before. Abyss answered Sanji while swimming happily. Hearing Sanji's words, Zoro and Akin looked at each other, and they also reacted at this time. Huh. Usopp said in shock. Even Luffy can only lean on the shore and move with difficulty, how come you are fine, Abyss? I don't know either. API's was still swimming happily. But I haven't swum for a long time, and now I can finally swim, it's really strange. Looking at Abyss floating like an otter, everyone fell into deep thought, and then turned to look at Luffy. Luffy smiled and said, just now, Long Yi told me this. He said that the weaker people seem to be freer in the dragon pool, the greater their improvement will be. But Long Yi's words were a bit ambiguous, and I couldn't judge accurately for a while. If it is really according to what Long Yi said, my improvement should be the smallest. Abyss's improvement should be the largest. But it is not necessarily. After soaking for an hour, I will use my hands to test your dojin. Although dojin cannot fully represent strength, it can be estimated. At this point, Luffy turned to look at Usopp and said. Don't eat your devil fruit yet, wait until you're done bathing. Usopp nodded in agreement. While Luffy and the others were bathing, Eric was already looking for them like crazy. He ran around the entire island quickly, only to find that he had lost the person. Oh my god. Where are the people? Where is such a big dragon and a group of people? After searching for a while and finding no one, Eric returned to the port to wait for them. He looked back at the island and sneered. Your ship is here, I don't believe you won't come back. Humph. I'll wait here. I'll have the advantage of waiting for the tired ones. An hour later. In the Dragon's Nest Dragon Pool. According to what Lord Long said, the upper limit for humans to take a bath is 1 hour. But in fact, after more than half an hour, Luffy and the others no longer felt that their bodies were improving. They continued to soak just to do as Lord Long said and see if there would be any unexpected surprises. But obviously there weren't any. After getting ashore, Luffy used the 6-style swimming technique hand combination, and then Nami asked them to punch themselves with all their strength one by one. After testing one by one, Luffy got a piece of information that shocked him. The order of everyone's Dao power increases as follows. Nami's Dao power increased by 500, total Dao power, 620. Abisa's Dao power increased by 400, total Dao power, 410. Usopp's Dao power increased by 400, total Dao power, 700. Sanji said the power increased by 350, and the total power, 680. Akin's power increased by 350, and the total power, 700. Zoro's power increased by 300, and the total power, 750. And Luffy himself also increased his power by 300. The total power now, 1180. It's simply a cheating increase. It's really outrageous, it's outrageous to the extreme. After a wave of feelings, Luffy told the other party about their improvements, which immediately caused an uproar among the crowd, but then there was a burst of joy. If according to what Lord Long said, they not only improved their strength, but also increased their lifespan by at least 100 or 200 years. The effect of the dragon pool is so terrifying. Just when everyone was excited to feel the changes in their bodies, Usopp suddenly spoke nervously. Road. Luffy, should I eat this devil fruit now? Eat. Usopp. Luffy looked at Usopp and smiled. When I was a kid, I swallowed it by accident. I didn't even taste the flavor at that time. I swallowed it. I think you can savor the flavor of the devil fruit slowly. After all, good things should be savored slowly. Oh. Usopp's eyes lit up and he said. Is that so? Then let me have a taste to see how delicious this legendary devil fruit is. Usopp brought the cucumber with wings to his mouth. Seeing this, Luffy's mouth curled up in a weird arc. Except for Nami who saw Luffy's smirk, everyone else was staring at Usopp, full of curiosity. Seeing Luffy's smile, they knew that this man was going to make trouble again. Snap! Usopp bit off more than half of the cucumber with wings and chewed it quickly in his mouth. But the next moment, Usopp's face suddenly turned red, and his eyes stared at Luffy with disbelief. At this time, Usopp's facial features were distorted and his expression was ferocious. Zoro and the others were shocked when they saw it. Sanji said in shock. It's over, could this thing be poisonous? Luffy patted Zoro's shoulder and laughed. Ha 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 ha, Usopp, how is it? Isn't it delicious? You can't spit it out. It would be a pity if you waste this devil fruit. You know, the market price of the devil fruit is 100 million berries, and it's the kind that is out of stock. Usopp, you are shouting 100 million berries. 100 million berries, 100 million berries, you can't spend them all in your lifetime. Ha ha ha. Everyone saw Luffy laughing, and then looked at Usopp's expression, and they also reacted at this time. This devil fruit might not be poisonous, but it might be unpalatable. After hearing Luffy's words, Usopp immediately covered his mouth with both hands, then chewed it frantically with a ferocious look on his face for a few times and swallowed it down with a gulp. It has to be said that Usopp is also a ruthless person. Luffy. Usopp stuck out his tongue and yelled weakly. This devil fruit tastes worse than shit. It tastes horrible. You actually want me to savor it slowly, are you a devil, Luffy? Goose 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 goose. Everyone burst into laughter when they heard this. Luffy pointed at the half cucumber with wings in Usopp's hand and urged. Usopp, there is still half of it. We can't waste it. What if your ability is impaired if you don't finish it? I swallowed it in one gulp at that time. Luffy felt that he had to let Usopp eat it quickly. If he didn't let him finish it, his ability would take effect soon. Usopp was indeed a ruthless person. After listening to Luffy's words, he actually threw the remaining half of the devil fruit into his mouth, chewed it frantically for a few times, and then forced himself to swallow it in one gulp. Plop. After finishing his meal, Usopp collapsed on the ground, breathing out more than breathing in, and muttered, "It's too bad to eat. It's too bad to eat. Usopp, how come you eat so fast?" Luffy stared in disbelief. "I forgot to tell you, you only need to take one bite of the devil fruit." "What? Luffy?" Usopp, who was lying on the ground, looked up at Luffy in disbelief. Why did he have tears in his eyes? Because he was betrayed by Luffy. Goose 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 goose. Everyone laughed again when they saw this. At this moment, there was movement from the Dragon Lord in the center of the lake in the distance, and there were bursts of hissing sounds. Everyone turned around subconsciously and saw that the Dragon Lord, who was originally so old that even his feathers had lost their color, suddenly hissed. Then everyone saw that his feathers turned green and shiny at a speed visible to the naked eye. Even his bald forehead grew green feathers again. Ah! Lord Dragon has become younger. Abyss, who had jumped into the dragon pool and was having fun, saw this scene and waved her hands and shouted excitedly. Long Yi responded to her and then became quiet again, starting to familiarize himself with the situation in his body. Abyss responded and continued swimming. Wow! Rejuvenation is the real deal. How did this dragon pond come into being? It's really awesome. Luffy couldn't help but sigh at the amazing world of pirates. Indeed. At this moment, a deep and strange voice came from behind Luffy and the others. Swish. The next moment, everyone turned their heads and saw a 1,000-year-old dragon that was about the same size as Lord Long, but with extremely lush wings and a faint green glow. Moreover, this 1,000-year-old dragon had many subtle differences from Lord Long, and looked much more handsome. The wings emitted a light green glow, and there was a pair of sharp dragon horns on its head that also emitted green glow. The legs were not like the chicken claws of the 1,000-year-old dragon, but were similar to those of a dinosaur, appearing thick and powerful, and there were 2 pairs of sharp claws on the chest. The dragon's tail also looked very slender and powerful, and the feathers also emitted a green glow. If it weren't for the fact that the dragon's nose had grown a lot and was too distinctive, Luffy would have been a little afraid to recognize it. But when he saw this dragon that looked like a 1,000-year-old dragon, Luffy still spoke tentatively. Usopp. After hearing Luffy's words, the Millennium Dragon turned its head and looked at Luffy, with doubts in its light golden dragon eyes. What's the matter, Luffy? What? This is Usopp. Everyone was shocked. Usopp saw Luffy and the others looking at him like this, and he couldn't help but asked in confusion. Luffy, what's wrong with you? Why are you looking at me like that? Hey, this isn't true, is it? Zoro's eyes widened. Could it be that the devil fruit just now was in the form of a Millennium Dragon? Zoro, what are you talking about? Usopp shook his huge dragon head and looked at Zoro with a puzzled look. If it weren't for his long nose that was too abrupt and the 2 horns on his head, Zoro and the others would not have recognized him as Usopp. Even the devil fruit couldn't change that nose. Hiss. Sanji took a puff of his cigarette and pointed to the lake. Go to the lake and take care of it yourself. Usopp walked to the lake in confusion and looked down, then turned his head and shook the dragon head, looked down again, and suddenly fell silent. Immediately, Usopp wanted to rub his eyes with his hands, but the next second he saw a huge wing moving in front of him. Monster! Usopp screamed and fell into the lake with a splash. Ah! I'm drowning, I'm drowning. After struggling for a while at the lakeside, Usopp suddenly realized that the water was only as deep as his stomach. Seeing this, he immediately scratched his head with his wings in embarrassment. Everyone looked at Usopp in silence. Luffy walked up to Usopp with interest, looked him up and down, and said, You should have an animal-type fruit, right? But it's in the form of a 1,000-year-old dragon. But a 1,000-year-old dragon doesn't have dragon horns, so how come you have these dragon horns? Is there any introduction to your devil fruit in your memory? Well, introduce. Just now, a burst of knowledge and power came into my head. Let me think about it. Usopp in the form of the Millennium Dragon rested his huge wings on his chin, looking thoughtful. Everyone is now looking forward to what the ability of Usopp's fruit is. It doesn't look like an ordinary animal-type fruit. Luffy also thinks so. Is there a Millennium Dragon form in the animal-type fruit? He has never heard of it. But he can't be sure that there is no such form. If there is no such form in the animal-type fruit, then could it be? Thinking of this, Luffy looked at Usopp with brighter eyes. He also looked forward to it. Thanks for watching.